I know it's disheartening to not be getting those placements in competitions, but placements are not everything. They can be helpful, but they're not everything. The most important thing is that you're doing something that you enjoy.
Writing this screenplay, Third Man, I'd love to know, like, give me your little summary of it. That would be awesome. And then how did you come up with this idea? Why did you write this script? And what was like your journey from conception to winning the ScreenCraft competition? And then we can kind of go into how things have been since you won the competition.
Okay, yeah. So Third Man is it's a feature script, which is very kind of close to me. I wrote it a few years ago. I wrote the first draft. There have been many drafts since then because the first draft was like 160 pages. I tend to write long and then cut very aggressively until it's just, everything that I need and nothing I don't. Awesome. In terms of where the idea came from, so very briefly, Third Man is a World War I feature about a young British soldier who speaks German because he has a German father and kind of has to hide that from his side in the war because it's not, it's frowned upon that he has a connection to the German side. And when his platoon captures a German prisoner of war who our main character falls in love with, he has to kind of hide that side of him, hide his love for this guy while trying to help out his platoon. So it's kind of like delving into themes of choosing between your heart and your duty to your country. I'm fascinated by war. I love war stories. I don't love war. I love anti-war stories, I should say. Because to me, it's just absurd that it is a way that people resolve conflicts. The idea of, governments sending young men and women to go and kill young men and women from other countries is just, it doesn't make any sense to me. And I like to write about things that I don't understand in an attempt to kind of get to understand them better. So that's kind of where it started. I'd also read a lot of memoirs. I read All Quiet on the Western Front, which is being made or is, coming out soon as a Netflix movie, which is exciting. But, there's so many accounts of people meeting, fighting in these wars and then meeting someone from the other side who they've been told, like, this is your enemy. You got to go out there and kill them at all costs because they stand for everything we don't. And then they meet them because they're a prisoner of war or whatever. And they, more often than not, like they're just like us, the German guy we captured, he hung out with us. He was a nice guy, family man, just like us, So it's interesting to me to look at the way that as individuals, we all kind of share the same values. And then when systems and institutions and governments come into it, that's when the divisions occur. And so it's just that kind of friction I like to explore.
Gotcha. I mean, that sounds like such an interesting story. Is this just purely something you came up with? Is it based on like a true account that you read about? Because this is it's so relevant right now with everything happening, in Ukraine and everything, like war right now. It's like so relevant, your story, but also dealing with like some of the political themes that are in there. So what was is it you completely made it up, or is this like based on something that you read?
Yeah, I completely made it up. So I love period writing. I love exploring worlds in the past and the future, but it's completely made up. The actual events did not take place, but I did read a lot of memoirs I tried to get a kind of cross section of memoirs, like French memoirs, English memoirs, Australian memoirs, German memoirs. And the interesting thing was that this theme came out that like everyone felt the same way about the war, even though on the surface, it seems like they would be, they were completely opposed in all of their principles. It's like when you get down to the human level, everyone felt the same way.
Yeah, definitely. So I'm going to put a pin in that because hearing your story, I'm like, okay, I definitely want to dig into a little bit more about like your process and how many drafts, but just to kind of continue on like how it got to the place of winning the ScreenCraft competition. So you said it was really long, you trimmed it up. When did you hear about ScreenCraft? Like, how did you even hear about ScreenCraft?
So I actually heard about ScreenCraft, I want to say like 2015, maybe. I was
Oh,
back
really?
in Australia. I was working in a completely different career. I wasn't writing full time. And I had a short film script that I had written in my undergrad degree. And my professor had said, this is pretty good. You should think about like submitting it to competitions and things. I had no idea, like back in Australia, what the competitions were. I had no connections in the industry, either there or here. And I just Googled and found ScreenCraft and just
Okay.
sent it through. And I think that short film was like a semi-finalist in the short film competition. And I got some notes. I paid for some notes from a ScreenCraft reader because I had no friends who had ever read a screenplay before, no one to give me feedback. And the notes were really motivational.
Nice.
They helped me to make it better. And at that stage, it was even just stuff like formatting because I didn't know what I was doing.
Yeah.
But it really made me think like, okay, this is a clear way to improve. Because I think in screenwriting, especially when you're just starting out, it's really hard to even know where to look. There's no clear path. So to have someone who knew more than I did telling me what to do was really useful.
That's awesome. Love to hear that. Love the notes kind of gave you that little motivation, like when you're first starting out. That's awesome. So okay, when you finish this screenplay, what was or I guess you submitted it to ScreenCraft, and then what was like your reaction when you won? Did they do the call with you? Because they've been doing where they're calling winners. Did they do that with it? I think they just started doing that.
Yeah, I've seen that, and I was like, "That's cool. That's a really good idea." But no, they did not do the call. They called me on the phone, and I was shocked. Like I couldn't believe it. I'd had some success with this screenplay in other competitions and made a few finalist rounds for things, but was kind of at the stage where I was like, okay, people are responding well to it, which was really nice to feel, but just kind of missing out on that final step and then not really getting much traction because I wasn't like the winner. And I was just over the moon to have won it. I didn't know what would come next. But I definitely didn't expect like how much ScreenCraft would then champion me having won that, which we can move on to. Yeah.
I do want to say in your email, so you submitted to Nicholl, you made finalists, which that's a huge deal. Like Nicholl is probably the biggest kind of renowned competition, like so many submissions. So that's amazing right there. And then, so you're signed with APA, right, at this point. And I would love to know, I do kind of, and you can go wherever you want with this. It's kind of up to you how much detail you want to go into. I think it's kind of beneficial though, for people who are just starting to get into this, like from winning the competition, what was kind of the process to getting from there to, I know you probably talked with one of the development executives at ScreenCraft and you started getting meetings, general meetings. Yeah. That's the process. But what was like the summary of the process from winning to signed with APA? Congratulations, by the way. Like that's really awesome.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm really lucky to be with them. I have a great team of agents there. So the process from winning to getting signed at APA, it was very smooth. I mean, for me, I felt like ScreenCraft did most of the work. After I won, ScreenCraft reached out and was like, congratulations, we want to help you like strategize in terms of like which reps you should be talking to, who might like your material. I write a lot of period drama. I write genre stuff too, but it's like I had no idea who to target. I didn't even know how to find out who might like the sort of stuff I was writing. So ScreenCraft are really useful in terms of saying like, we think this list of people would be great. We're sending it out to them. And then they just were great at communicating back and saying like, APA was one of the first people actually who replied and said they loved what was going on. We set up a meeting. I felt like ScreenCraft really held my hand through all of it. I didn't, they just said they want to talk to you. I wanted to talk to them. We had a great meeting. And that day, APA reached out through ScreenCraft again and was like, yeah, they wanted to sign me. And
Okay. Yeah,
I
that's
said I
awesome.
had to, yeah, I mean, it was great. I said I had to think about it because I always like to, take a little bit of time, even if it seems like an amazing opportunity, which it is. And then after a few hours and talking to a few people, I was just even more sure that I
No.
wanted to do it and went back and yeah, we've been with them ever since.
That's awesome. I mean, you definitely had a smooth experience. I've heard enough of these stories to know it can like it's different for everybody, but it sounds like you had a smooth experience. But I am curious. So you said you kind of like writing period pieces. When you talk to ScreenCraft or even just your own kind of thought process, were you thinking about building a portfolio that is centered around something specific? Because that's something that I hear a lot is people say, if you're looking for representation, like when you get to that stage, it's kind of important that you have a voice or you have like,
Yeah.
it's like you don't want to put yourself in a box, but at the same time, it's Hollywood. So people do kind of have to be able to see you a certain way. What was like your thought process on that? Or did you talk with ScreenCraft about any of that stuff too? Like, and by the way, how many screenplays do you have right now, like in your portfolio or whatever you want to call it?
So I have 4, maybe 5 that I'll be ready to like send out,
Gotcha.
in a few minutes
Okay.
notice, because yeah, they're just ready. I mean, I'm sure that as a writer, like you always think you could rewrite something. There's something that you read in the last time you looked at it and you're like, I could
Yeah.
change that. But I have 5 that are ready to send out. Um, I think, what was the other part of the question?
I guess just kind of piggybacking off of ScreenCraft and like you had such a smooth process. So it's like, I guess there's not, like it seems like it was pretty, and it's
Oh,
so
right.
crazy that like they signed you that quickly too. Like like they wanted to sign you
Yeah.
that quickly. That must mean they must have just loved your screenplay.
Right. And we had a great chat. Like they were exactly what I wanted in reps as well. And they liked my work and they seem to really get it, which I think is a big thing when you're talking to reps. Like, like the way I knew that these guys were right for me was that when, all reps who are talking to you are going to compliment your scripts. Otherwise, like, why are they talking to you? They liked what you were writing, but I think it's important that they get what you were trying to do when you wrote it. So like they summarized it in a way that was exactly what I was trying to do. And that's not that common that happens. Like they totally got it. And I felt if they can summarize me back to me in a way that I agree with, then they will be accurately representing and selling me to other people. So
That's a good tip. Like that's by the way, don't mind me. I'm just kind of taking
no,
notes.
no, no
Points.
worries.
That's a really good tip. Like for anyone who's in that process, if like try to, and it's not like you should tell an agent, but have it in your mind. Like if they're able to summarize what's going on, like in a deeper level in the subtext, like that's a good way to kind of judge. That's definitely a good tip.
Yeah, I
Uh,
think that's useful. And also just like, how would they sell you as a writer? Like that was really the only question or the biggest question I had in my mind when I was talking to them, because I knew I liked them. They, talked about my scripts in a way I liked, but then I was like, okay. And I asked them straight up and I put them on the spot and I was like, how would you sell me? And they had a great answer, which I totally agreed with. That's how I wanted to be represented. And that's why I signed with them.
That's awesome. So that's really cool. Okay, so I guess I mean that's you had a and by the way, I wanted to ask you about this too. You worked in you were staffed up in a writer's room, right?
Yeah, I was.
So was that after getting signed with APA and everything? Like where did that come into the process?
So that was actually before.
Oh,
So that
really?
was probably something that will obviously would factor into getting repped. It's going to help if you have a job in a room, whether that be support staff or staff writer. But yeah, I mean, I was very lucky to get that job. I got the job through like personal connections with like, it was a friend of a friend of a friend,
Gotcha.
was a showrunner's assistant and knew that they were looking for samples from new writers. So I was lucky to get it through that.
Awesome. Cool. So I kind of want to go back now. So we kind of know I got the story, how you got to getting representation. But so tell me a little bit about, well, I guess let's go way back. When did you get into screenwriting? How did you even get that interest? I'm sure you've probably been a movie person your whole life. Most of us are, but when did it turn into, I want to do more? Like, I want to start getting involved in this. Like, what was that? When did that?
Yeah, that's tough. I mean, I was always writing, but I wasn't screenwriting until my teens. So like, I think the writing thing started when my aunt gave me a copy of The Hobbit when I was like 8 years old. I loved it. And then for years and years, I would just write like one-page epic fantasy stories, which were like blatant rip-offs of The Hobbit. It was always like elves and dwarves and whatever, traveling to a mountain to get something, treasure probably. So that was where my writing was at for many years. And then I think the screenwriting interest started when I got a copy of The Departed. It was like a deluxe DVD box edition of The Departed, and it happened to have the script in it. And I'd never seen a script before. I'd never read a script, and I loved the movie enough that I was like, what is this deluxe edition? I'd check out this little book with it, and I read the whole script, and I was like, wow, like you can actually, like, firstly, someone writes this, because I hadn't even considered that before. And because I always thought, like, I like film, maybe I want to be a director. And then once I started looking at screenplays, I was like, maybe I want to be the person who crafts the story like from nothing, and then someone else can kind of interpret what I've written. So I think it started there, and then just developed. I made short films for 5 or so years with a friend of mine. Did a bit of like film studies in undergrad, but not screenwriting itself. That was back in Australia. And then I was just writing for a long time, even while I was doing a different career, completely different. I would come home and write in my free time until I got to the point where I was like, I just know this is what I want to do. I get so much joy out of it. Like, I'm doing like 12-hour days at work and then coming home and spending my free time doing it. Yeah. What if I could try and make it a full-time thing? And that's when I started applying to grad schools in the US. Yeah.
I mean, that's such a cool story. That the Departed screenplay was like that's such a good story. You gotta like tell that story with every interview you do, because that's an amazing screenplay. That's like one of my definitely top 10 movies for sure. So what was your first maybe not the short films, but what was like your first real feature script that you kind of really dived into it fully? What was that like process, like getting your first feature done? Or was this one your first? This one wasn't. Was this one your first?
This was my second feature, and this one was like me trying to address all the mistakes I had made in the first one, because the first one was such a mess that I haven't shown anyone to this day. Like, it's not in a place where I would submit it to any competitions. It's even in a place I haven't looked at it since I finished it. The first one was like, can I finish a screenplay? Like, can I write that many pages? And the second one was, and Third Man was the second one. It was like, look at what I did in the first one, analyze why it didn't work, think about how I can fix that, and then write a new one with those lessons. And so Third Man really was like a technical exercise for me. It's like, okay, I've succeeded in finishing one. Now can I write a good one? And I know that's very like simplified, but that's how I felt about it.
I mean, it's interesting. You haven't looked at that first one. Like, what if you look back on it and you're like, man, there's some really good stuff in here I need to readdress. That happens, when you put something away for so long and then you come back to it and you're like, either it's like, what the hell was I doing? Or it's like, man, this is kind of good. But with Third Man, so tell me a little bit about there's no right or wrong with this. Like, I always like to preface these conversations, because for some reason, I don't know if you're on Twitter, but screenwriting Twitter is like sometimes just the most like aggressive. Like, people are so like, no, it's this way or it's this way. It's like, there's really no right or wrong. It's just everyone has their own process. But what is your process from when you get the idea? What is that like first thing you do? Do you outline? And what is kind of your steps to getting through to that first draft? I would like to just hear about your process.
Yeah, well, I agree with the thing about screenwriting Twitter as well. Like, I sometimes see like very overly aggressive advice about, like, there was a whole controversy about like whether you can say "we see" in a screenplay. And I was like,
little things like that,
no rules. Like, no one who's like worth their salt is going to stop reading because you said "we see." Like, if it's a good script, they'll keep reading. But in terms of process, it's interesting. I think every script is different. But generally I am a very like avid outliner. I outline in great detail. I like to start quite macro. I like to get it to a point where I can write a log line, and then I like to split that log line maybe into one line for like Act 1, one for the first half of Act 2, and so on. So I have like 4 lines, and then just keep kind of building out from there. I often start with the world or the character, hopefully character. Sometimes character comes a bit later, because I'm just fascinated by a certain period in history or a certain idea. The one thing that I've always had trouble doing, and I'm sure other people can do it, but I can't start with theme. If I start with theme, I feel like my characters they're not real. They're cardboard cutouts that move around where I need them to, so that the message I'm trying to put out there is I guess complete.
Yeah. No, I feel you. So that's really interesting. I definitely want to ask you a little bit more about that, like theme versus character, subtext, but in terms of character, you said you kind of start with world or character. How do you develop your characters? Like, what is your process with? Do you do a lot of backstory work? Do you kind of just let, like, Aaron Sorkin, which I'm sure you're familiar, his whole thing, is intention and obstacle, which is like the classic Aristotle poetics, intention, obstacle. But how do you get into the nitty gritty of character? What is your process there like?
Well, I think that's massive. Yeah. Intention and obstacle. What does the character want? What is stopping them from doing it? In terms of obstacle, I like to break that down into external obstacles, which can be, environment, people, internal obstacles, which I think are more interesting, but have to be often paired with external obstacles. So like internally, why can't they do it? What within them is preventing them? Are they scared? Are they, wanting to conform to society's expectations of them? That sort of thing, I think, is where the real character stuff comes. But it often, for me at least, to keep the drama going and the narrative momentum, has to be paired with some kind of external obstacle. So I think about that. I like to think about the big moments in the script. So like, what are the 3 or so big moments for the character? And in terms of big moments, I'm talking about like, what is the worst, most impossible situation I can put this particular character in, where they've got 2 choices, neither of them is good, both are going to cost them a lot, but whatever they choose, it's going to reveal a lot about who they are. Because I think for me, character is entirely revealed, or mostly revealed, by like, what do they choose in difficult situations.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So let me go over this really quick, because this is like a really cool way for people maybe just starting out. Outlining is it's tough for a lot of people. And I hear all the time, a lot of young or people just starting out, not age, but just people who are kind of just starting out are like, no, I never outline. I don't like to outline. And again, there's no right or wrong, but almost everyone that I've interviewed with ScreenCraft, the people who've won, like almost everyone outlines. So I'm like, okay, there's obviously something to the benefit of outlining, but so it sounds to me like kind of your process is, so first you like to kind of have the big idea, and you try to narrow it down to where you can have like a log line of it, so you're able to communicate it easily. Then you think about things in terms of act, like, okay, a couple of sentences for Act 1, Act 2, Act 3, and then you start thinking about like world and character. And then I think it is really interesting, this idea of these big moments. I can't even remember who this person. Well, actually, I think it was Robert Town, the guy who wrote Chinatown. I think he talks about something similar. I'm not sure if you're familiar with that, but he does talk about like every screenplay or every movie is just a series of cathartic moments, and then everything else is all about those moments. So I think that's a really interesting thing. What is that process like with thinking about these big moments? Do you mean like in terms of beats in the script? Or are you just talking about like, these are the pivotal moments that people will remember when they leave the movie, Yeah,
I mean, for me, I totally agree with, I love that Robert Town quote. I know the one you're talking about. And I think that was pretty formative for me as well, like hearing that. In terms of the big moments, I'm thinking like, I always want to write something that I would like to watch. And the stuff that I like to watch and the stuff I remember is the stuff that has like that specific moment, where, you know, you feel that catharsis, like you feel it in your body. It's more emotional than it is like intellectual, for me at least. And I want to write stuff like that moves people. So I think, you know, how did they create that moment? Like I think of moments like the end of Gladiator or something like that movie is incredibly cathartic. And then so often it's the end, or at least the climax for me is like, it has to be a big moment that people will remember, that I personally would feel moved by watching. And then I think, okay, what is everything I have to set up in the previous 100 pages of this feature for that moment to be as big and meaningful as I want it to be? And I will write a list of every little thing that I have to set up throughout the screenplay. And then the trick is like, how do you, or for me at least, is like, how do I make all of that stuff compelling? It's not just setting stuff up. That all has to be interesting drama as well. And it's just got these like plants kind of couched in there so that this final moment, or even like, you know, the end of Act 2 or whatever big moment you're leading towards, just feels as emotionally satisfying or gut-wrenching or whatever you want it to be as you want.
Yeah, I love talking about this stuff. Every time I do one of these, like it just gets like, I just want to write. Like every time I'm like, okay, I need to like write, because it's just really interesting. You know, not a lot of people talk about this stuff at this level. Like, I'm curious to know, you kind of mentioned earlier theme. You were like, you don't start with theme. You kind of, that for you, you know, you don't start with it, but do you think about theme? Like, when does that come into your process? How much do you think about it? And do you actually get into like subtext when you're actually writing your script? Everyone has had a different answer for that, but when does theme and subtext and all that stuff come into play for you?
I mean, I definitely think about it, like with Third Man, for instance. Like it was clear to me that it would have an anti-war leaning. It was never going to be a patriotic war film, but that's just because that wasn't me being like, I have to tell people that war is bad. I couldn't write a patriotic war movie, I don't think. But in terms of like the deeper themes, I think a lot of that, even if you think you know what it is, or if, you know, when I'm doing it, I will get to the end of the screenplay and realize that like things arose during the writing of the actual pages that I didn't expect. And theme becomes more of a rewriting thing for me. It's, you know, I will more craft that in the rewrite and make sure I'm hitting that a bit harder. But, you know, I think often like theme comes out of character choices too. Like theme isn't just something you tell the audience through like, you know, exposition or whatever. It's like, this is what this movie is about. It's like, if your character chooses to do something horrific and they're rewarded for it, like story, and that's the text I'm talking about, not the subtext. Yeah. It's like, that's just what happens. Then people will read into that a theme of, you know, you don't have to be a good person to be rewarded, or like, or vice versa. Like, you know, you can be punished for doing good things.
Yeah. And that's, you kind of said earlier, you were like, part of what you like about screenwriting is just this idea of collaboration, which to me, that is so interesting. It's like, I think you're spot on with like, you kind of think about theme, but it comes when you're writing. I mean, it's like, that's a beautiful thing, right? You kind of learn things from your characters as you're writing. But the thing that's like, what I think about that would seem so like, what would be so much fun is when you do get to that place where a director comes on board and like takes your script, like you have no idea what they're going to do with it. It can become a completely different story depending on how they interpret it. And I think that's like the coolest thing about this craft to me, is how open-ended and how everything can be interpreted so differently, you know? But you mentioned rewriting. This is another topic that comes up all the time on like screenwriting Twitter and stuff. But what is your rewriting process like? How, you know, writing is rewriting. We've all heard that quote, but do you finish a draft, then rewrite? Do you rewrite when you write? Like, what is your process like with rewriting?
Good question. I think my natural instinct is to try and rewrite as I write, because I'm scared that the first draft won't be any good. But I've learned over the years to kind of fight against that, because I don't think that that's actually the best way to do it. For me, I've kind of gotten to the stage now where I can, you know, pump out a much faster a little bit messier first draft and then go back and do the rewrite outside of that. I feel like if I'm doing a faster first draft, I'm not as concerned by the first draft being perfect. Then I'm more free to come up with stuff that wasn't in the outline, get into a better flow. And also I just write faster, which is sometimes necessary. From there, like once I do have that first draft out there, which for me is normally too long, I will get notes from friends, people that I trust, who I know aren't going to disown me if they hate the first draft, and just people who I think have really good instincts when it comes to storytelling. And I will kind of gather all of those in one big document and then kind of methodically like put it into different, like a table, and have like, these are all the notes about this character. These are all the notes about theme. These are all the notes about, the pace or whatever. And then I will kind of prioritize and do a pass for each individual thing. I like to not do like one big rewrite. I like to do a lot of little rewrites so I can just track like this secondary character's emotional arc or something, and just like make sure I look at every scene that they're in and make sure that they are tracking properly.
Wow, that's really interesting. That's a really interesting process, like actually compiling. It's like, it's almost like, do you have like an engineering or scientific background or something? Because that's like a very kind of almost like an engineering process a little bit, gathering all this data, putting it together, and then doing one thing at a time instead of just kind of doing the whole thing, which I'm sure is so beneficial to do it that way. What's your kind of philosophy behind that? Is that just what you do naturally, or did you learn that from someone, or how did that come about?
I have a legal background, so maybe that's part of it, that's very analytical. But I think it was from film school. I think I learned that through one of my professors. It was a TV professor, actually, who suggested that is like a way of keeping track of all the notes you're getting, which, by the way, you don't obviously have to, incorporate all the notes you get. You might hate some of the notes you get. Some people might not understand what you're trying to say with the screenplay. They might not get a specific character, but the ones you do like and the ones you think are going to help you, I do like to collate those. And often also by doing that, you realize that like 5 people have the same note. And if these are people that you generally trust, you should probably heed that advice. Even if you don't agree with it initially, at least take the time to reflect on that and figure out if that's the way to go, or if there's a note behind the note that you need to address. There's probably something that's not working for people.
Yeah, no, that's really good advice. And just while we're on the topic, how important is feedback for you, like in your process? Like how big of a part of your process is feedback? Because I talk to some writers that don't even like to ever get feedback. And I'm like, how are you going to know? Like, how are you going to, the whole point of this is sharing your story. I'm the same way. Like it's actually like one of the most enjoyable things is when I start to put it out there and can kind of talk about it. But so what is like, how important is feedback for you? How big of a part of your process is it?
I love it. I mean, there is no process for me without feedback. It's a massive, crucial part. And it is probably the most enjoyable part for me as well. Yeah. Even if people tear the thing apart. I actually love when people come back and are like, you need to change this massive thing, because if they're smart and the note is good, then it's like, well, I understand how you can be like, well, that's more work to do. But really what it is like smart people who you trust telling you how to make your work better. Yeah. And that is such an enjoyable thing. It's such a privilege to know people who can help you do that. So
and so it sounds to me like you do a good job of like, you don't take things personally, which is like, I think so important. I mean, I feel like that's a big part of people's success. A lot of the people that I look up to and people that I've chatted with, that's definitely a common thread, is like, you got to be able to take criticism and take feedback and be smart about it, like you said, and implement it instead of like, having an ego about it. So I love that. I love talking about this too, because I do feel like I'm hoping our generation, like just kind of the younger generation, our generation and younger, is going to maybe help change Hollywood for the better, with like getting rid of the ego and a lot of that goes on in this industry, So it's hopeful when I hear people talk about that, like you actually love getting feedback and criticism. Like I'm always like, okay, awesome. Thankfully, there's like people like this coming up in this industry. So I want to talk about film school a little bit for sure. But before that, you're talking about how you write quickly. You kind of get through your first draft. You write quickly. What are your thoughts on writer's block? Or do you like how do you stay motivated? That's something like any tips, any advice, anything that you can give me that just kind of helps with writer's block and staying motivated. I would love that.
Yeah. Okay. I've never, this is going to sound bad at first, but I've never experienced writer's block, or what I think people refer to when they say writer's block. What I do experience all the time is procrastination. But I've never actually sat down to write and just felt like blocked, like I can't do this. And so I have tips for like how to get past procrastination, which I use myself.
Well, honestly, I think probably most people get confused with writer's block versus procrastination. There's a part of me that doesn't even really believe writer's block so much, because I do think a lot of it is you're just procrastinating. You're just not getting on the computer and doing it. But yeah, so what are some of your tips with like getting past procrastination?
I mean, you've got to trick yourself, or I've got to trick myself. Tell yourself you're going to write one line. That works for me all the time, because sitting down and writing the first line is the hardest part. And once I do that, by the time I finish that line, I've had like 3 other ideas that I just want to continue writing. And I forget that I even sat down to write one line, and 2 hours later, I've done what I had to do. So I know that sounds easy, but it really is hardest. The hardest part is sitting down and doing that first line. And something else, I don't know if this works for like people's writer's block, but something that I do if I, am feeling kind of anxious about if there's a really difficult scene I have to write, and I'm just like not feeling at my best, like I'm not as alert intellectually as I would want to be to write the scene, I'll sit down and write like 2 pages of just stream of consciousness, just as fast as I can, no punctuation, typos don't matter. And it's literally just putting down whatever I think of first. It's not about the script. It's just like an inner monologue. And by the time I've done that, like my fingers are just ready to type anything. And my brain is like, it doesn't matter. I think it's kind of teaching myself that putting words on the page is not a permanent thing. Yeah. If not the perfect version of the scene I want to write, at least I can get down a version, and I'll fix it later.
Yeah, that's awesome. I love that. I do feel like for me, free writing, which I guess is it's like stream of consciousness, I do feel like that is what keeps me passionate about what I'm working on. Like tapping, it's almost like just trying to let your subconscious just vomit whatever is out there, and stuff always comes up that's like, wow, I didn't even think about that. And so this is something I want to talk about, since we're kind of going into, well, first off, let me recap, because these are some good tips right here. Tricking yourself, it's a really good way to think about it. Write one line. Just tell yourself, I'm probably going to clip this out for social media, what you said earlier. This is like a good way to think about it. Trick yourself. Just go to write one line, because that's the hardest part. And then once you do it, you get that momentum, and it starts from there. And then also, I do think stream of consciousness is such a key thing that I don't hear a lot of people talking about, but I do feel like there's something there with like tapping into the passion. But that's what I wanted to ask you about, is passion for the craft, like passion for cinema. How do you think about passion first off? Like, what is passion to you for whatever your craft is? I mean, in general, but for you, screenwriting, how do you think about passion?
That's a great question. I've never really thought about it, because honestly, it's just the only thing I want to do. So, I've had
I like asking this question, because I do feel like it's something that, I don't know, I feel like it's something where passion to me seems like an integral part of any success that you come across. But it's like, what does that even mean? Like, what does it mean to be passionate,
Yeah, I guess it's like something that gives you energy as opposed to takes it away. And even after a long day of writing, like I will be energized. I'll be excited about what I've done. I'll have more energy than when I started the day, because I honestly love doing it. And having written for 4 or 5 hours is just like invigorating to me. I've worked in a career where, you know, and I think most careers are like this. It's a bit of a slog, and I wasn't happy day to day doing the job. I didn't look forward to going to work. So, you know, it's an absolute privilege to be able to do something that I do love. And I think I'm lucky. I'm really lucky that I just know that this is the thing I want to do because I just derive so much pleasure from doing it.
Yeah.
Um, yeah.
No, I think that's a good way to think about it is if it gives you energy, you know, there's something there and explore it, you know, keep going with it, whatever that means. So let me get into, so we talked about like procrastination, you had some really good tips, and motivation, which I guess that's all tied together. Like motivation at the end of the day is kind of like discipline. Don't think about motivation. That's kind of how I think about it.
Yeah.
By the way, what is your routine like? Do you have like a strict writing routine? Do you write every day? Like, what is your like writing routine like?
I do not have a strict routine. I would like to have a strict routine, or you know, I've seen other people succeed with that, so I think it would be good. But for me, it's more, and it also depends what you're talking about writing, what you mean when you talk about writing. Because for me, I'm always thinking, I'm always, you know, coming up with ideas, writing them down, but not necessarily for any specific project. If it is for a specific project, I might have just like a Word file that I'm just dumping stuff in until I get to a point where I have time to actually focus on that project. I'm always, you know, writing new log lines for things I think of, writing outlines. The actual time I spend writing pages is not a lot. I don't write pages every day. I don't have projects ready because I like to outline in great detail. So like, honestly, for me, most of the time is spent getting to the stage where pages are even something that I'm ready to write. And then pages themselves are quick.
Yeah.
But yeah, in terms of routine, not really. I tend to write in the afternoon to evening and sometimes early morning. I don't know why that is, but I often will be like ready for bed and then I'll have an idea. And then 3 hours later, I have like 10 pages, which is great, but I'm tired. And so I don't know. It's just, it's different for everyone, but that's what works for me.
No, I like that. I think there's definitely good insight there. You said you keep like a idea. You keep a compilation of ideas. It sounds like notes and stuff, which is very important. That I hear a lot of people say the same thing. I think it's key. Like if you have an idea, don't lose it. Get that idea. Like David Lynch always talks about. It's like fishing. You're going fishing and you sit there, and then the idea comes, and you got to like roll with it. But also, I do like what you said about. It's almost like you spend a lot of time developing and outlining, and then it's almost like, and I think there's something here. This is what a lot of us struggle with is like, if you develop it enough, the pages should come quickly. If you get to a place where you have it all so built up and you have all these notes, and that it just kind of, Aaron Sorkin talks about that same thing. Like that's what he spends like 2 hours watching, or he spends like 2 years just freaking watching sports all day, thinking about the idea. And then finally it just comes so quickly. So there's something to that, like not beating yourself up about not writing every day. Cause that's something I see all the time too. Like just the idea, the development stage is so important, you know?
Yeah.
And then, so, okay, it's already almost 2:50. This went by really fast. I want to get some of your thoughts on, or I just want to get your insight on like film school. Like what was film school like? How did it help you? Do you think it's necessary versus yes, no, should people go? Like just what is your kind of like your general consensus on film school right now, especially because the industry just changed so much. Especially with COVID, like things are so different out here in LA and everything. But what was your experience like at film school, and what is like your consensus on it?
Yeah. So first I'll say I definitely do not think film school is necessary. You don't need a degree to be a writer. You don't need any kind of, you don't need anything except a script that you've written that people like, really. And I think that's a great thing. It's also a scary thing sometimes. But yeah, you don't need to go to film school. Some people are just fantastic writers and are better at self-teaching than others. I personally feel like I did need film school, and I benefited massively from film school. I was coming from a completely different industry, although I'd been writing for myself for a long time, the stuff that I learned, especially just the craft that I learned at film school, was exactly what I needed. But I'm someone who likes to learn in that way. Like, I like university. I like going to an institution. The purpose is to learn more. And the other thing is you meet a lot of great people. And as someone who is moving from a different country, like all of my friends were my cohort, and that meant a lot. And now it's like we're out in the industry looking for jobs, helping each other. So it does really help to be. I think if you don't go to film school, it's harder to make that. But, you know, people use Twitter for that. There are other ways to build your community. It just depends. I think if you don't go to school, you have to be a bit more proactive with that.
Yeah, definitely. That's a really, I love to hear that. That's a good way to think about it. And at the end of the day, it's kind of like you make the best of it. It's up to you. If you go to film school or not, it's still going to be on your shoulders. Like, what do you do with film school? And that's what I hear a lot is like the community aspect, the networking that you get from it is highly beneficial. Like I'm like, man, that's the one thing I regret about not going to film school is like, it's been almost like, it's like a full-time job, just meeting people and trying to find people that you resonate with in the industry, you know? What are your thoughts on just like, and this is kind of not necessarily screenwriting related, but I like to kind of end things and just have fun with this part of the conversation. But like, what are your thoughts on Hollywood right now? Like, what are your thoughts on the industry, TV versus film, theaters, COVID? Like, what has been your experience coming from Australia too? Like being here now, like what are your kind of thoughts on the industry right now?
That's tough. It's so broad. I feel like there's so much stuff happening.
Here, I'll try to pick it up. How about what do you think is the future of Hollywood? Do you think things are going to be everything is TV? That's the way it's going, or do you think there is still like an opportunity for like a 90s, like how indie cinema came back in the 90s? Do you think that's possible, or like what are your thoughts on like TV versus, you know, movies right now, in theaters too, like cinematic releases and stuff?
Yeah, I mean, I love going to the theater still. Like, that's, for me, that is like the ultimate experience of like watching anything on the screen, is actually being in the theater with other people you don't know, and just kind of feeling those emotions in a public space all together. Like, I think there's something really special about that. So, and it might just be that I'm naive, but I don't think that's going to go away completely, because I think a lot of people still value that. I think, yeah, right. It's like it's so different watching at home by yourself. It's not the same having the content on like your Roku TV as it is being out there having this like epic experience. So I don't think it's going to go away. Obviously it's, you know, been impacted by the pandemic. There's lots of stuff, but you know, I just can't see people giving it up. I think there will always be people like myself, like yourself, willing to pay money to go see stuff in the theater. And that's what matters, right? If it's still making money, then they'll keep it going.
Yeah. Is that like your number one thing, is like you just want to write features, or have you tried writing a pilot or getting into TV stuff more?
Yeah, I've actually written more TV stuff, and I was on recently staff writer on a TV show. So I'm loving TV. TV, I think, is a completely different beast in terms of writing. Trying to create a launch pad in a pilot that will last, you know, have drama that lasts for several seasons is, I personally think, a greater challenge than a feature. But, you know, every script is different. It's hard to generalize, but I like that challenge. It feels like all scripts feel like a puzzle to me. And that's kind of what draws me to screenwriting, is that like, no matter how many times you've done it, you're always going to have struggles with the next one, because it's going to be completely different to anything you've ever done before. And I think TV represents for me at least, the hardest version of the puzzle. So yeah, I'm a big fan of the way TV's going. I like how cinematic TV is getting. We have some pretty amazing shows out right now that like 6 or 7 years ago would have been unthinkable.
Very true.
I think it's cool.
Yeah. And also you were mentioning earlier about the thing about theater, like having that emotional experience with real people, and also just so many people like are cooped up at home, especially during COVID. And it's like going to the theater is like a real fucking big experience. You pay money, you go out with friends, you go to the physical theater, and it like gets you out of the house, you know? But I do think there is something interesting about um, TV in relationship to social media. There's something really interesting about like how intertwined right now like TikTok is with TV culture mixed in with TikTok, and it's almost like so much of TV's audience is like coming from these social media platforms. Like there's like an obsession culture right now with social media, and I think there's something interesting to that has never happened before in cinema because social media has never been around. But it's like this new tool that allows people to share their passion for TV and characters. Like you see fan edits, all this kind of crazy stuff all the time. And I think there's something to that, you know, like moving into the future. Like I do think there's going to be something to like I'm still waiting for someone to make a TV show just on TikTok, like 1 minute episodes, and do like a whole like social media TikTok show. I think it would be interesting. But what I guess a way to end this, since it's already almost 3, is I like this is a question I like to ask because I feel like most of the people in the ScreenCraft community and kind of in the screenwriting community in general are people who have written a couple of scripts. Maybe they've written one script, but they are finding no success and they're not placing in competitions. So what is like any advice that you can have for someone who is truly passionate about it? They're serious about it, but they're just not able to find that momentum yet. Like what would you tell that person in a situation like that?
Well, the first thing is keep writing. If you're truly passionate about it, don't stop doing it. I know it's disheartening to not be getting those placements in competitions, but placements are not everything. They can be helpful, but they're not everything. The most important thing is that you're doing something that you enjoy. I think in terms of improving, if you're just getting no luck anywhere, find someone, hopefully you know someone who maybe has had a bit of success, and ask them to do like a script swap or something, or even if they'll just, you know, have the time to read your scripts and give you some really just brutally honest notes. And I always ask for notes that are brutally honest. I ask people to, you know, tear my script to shreds, because I know if they do that I'm going to get something useful out of it. It's no use to me if people are too polite to tell me that they actually hated something.
Thank you so much for doing this.